I've reached the hill at the foot of the Hattafell. What a beautiful place for a long rest. I've left the hut at Kvangil some 10 hours ago and have since come about 12 kilometers by foot. Like many others, I could have covered this distance in less than 4 hours, but I frequently had to stop, look about, dwell. The weather has been perfect for the last few days, and although I'm having difficulties taking steady pictures, I'm thankful for the strong winds constantly racing across the plain. They break up the clouds and drive them away, turning the landscape into a sea of light and shadow. I'm in Iceland, walking on the Laugavegur, on the path of the hot springs. So many times have I been to this country, and I have always wished to travel the highlands on foot. Thus I have chosen Iceland's most famous long-distance walking trail and one of Europe's most beautiful footpaths, the Laugavegur. It leads from Landmannalauga to the Thorsmörk Valley, where the actual Laugavegur ends some 50 kilometers away. A tour of at least 4 days. From there you can continue over the Fimmvörðuhálspass to Skoga at the southern coast. The way starts in Landmannalauga, and so I set out for the Fjallabak Nature Reserve in the south of Iceland. Visible from afar, a mountain sits in state above the southern part of Fjallabak. It is one of Iceland's most active volcanoes, and ancient writings refer to it as the gate to hell, the Hekla. Only seldom does Hekla offer a glimpse of its summit. For most of the time, low clouds cling to peak of this almost 1,500 meter high mountain, shrouding it mystically. In English, Fjallabak means beyond the mountains. And once you leave the bare region about the Hekla behind, the area gradually turns green and you are surrounded by Iceland's most beautiful region.
sun turns gray like a picture of the past.
In the low-lying plains, the last bits of snow remain until May, and the melting snowfields on the slopes feed numerous gushing streams, which flow to the rivers in the valley. I'm slowly reaching the starting point of the walking tour, Lampmannalaugar. The utility poles of the Sigalda power stations form a straight line along Highland Road F208. A sight hard to get used to amidst this primal landscape. After some kilometers, you reach the banks of the Frostastaðavatn, where the highland roads of the Fjallabak-Nyrðri and the Lampmannalaugh meet, only a few kilometers from the highland camp of Lampmannalaugar. It is early July, high season. During the few weeks that the highlands are accessible, tens of thousands visit this region. They are mostly tourists on a day trip, as there are many very interesting day excursions available all about the camp. Yet many who spend the night will make for the Laugavegur in the morning. They say that in only 2 months, almost 10,000 hikers use this trail, and though this number bodes ill, it won't keep me from going tomorrow. Here at the camp, everyone is busy in some way, preparing for the trek or relaxing from the leisurely day tour. I visit Nina and Smauri, who operate a shop out of an old school bus, buy some provisions and get into conversation with Mauri. He offers both good advice on the Laugavegur and some delicious coffee. And shortly afterwards, I set out to explore the area about the camp for the rest of the day. Within a few footsteps from the camp, a trail leads along the slope of the Blaunukur and into Kraingil Gorge. The river winds gently through the gorge, washing rock of all colors imaginable from the mountains. The trail continues into Laugavegun's field of lava and makes directly for the plumes at the foot of the 855-meter-high Brennisteinalder. The panorama view from the hill on the gorgeous mountains of Lampmannalauga and the dire, smoking field of lava is stunning. The entire region is amongst the most volcanically active areas of Iceland. The slope of the Brennisteinalder rises steeply, leading to an extensive plateau across numerous small snow patches. From there you have a view of the Blaunukur and a sweeping panorama all the way to the mountains of the Central Highlands. This is already the first part of the Laugavegur. My anticipation of the coming days grows with every step. I can hardly wait to take up my rucksack and start marching. Quietly, I hope that the weather will last over the next days. Lampmannalauga means the hot springs of the people of land. This refers to the farmers from the land region who long ago, exhausted after bringing down of the sheep, relaxed in the hot waters. Nowadays the countless tourists enjoy the bath, day in, day out, even at night. I go to the hut, ask the warden about the weather and specifying my route, check out for the next days. An important procedure as there have been serious incidents on the trail. Although there is a lot going on here with tourists constantly arriving by bus or their own cars, I enjoy the fantastic atmosphere lying over the valley, eat a bite and prepare my baggage for tomorrow. I watch some day tourists climbing up the narrow ridge to Blaunukur's summit and leave the valley in a northerly direction. Smári has told me of an alternative route, and having walked to the point where this route meets with the Laugavegur already yesterday, I decide to follow his advice. And so, highly motivated, I start to march carrying my 30-something kilos of baggage and after 15 minutes, I already have my first crucial experience. This small hole in the snowfield has the same diameter as my right thigh. A small hot stream has hollowed out the snowfield, thinning the snow cover and letting my leg fall through. After some time, I come to a small stream, whereupon I decide to stop for my first rest. It's almost a miracle that in the middle of so rough environment, seemingly bare of any vegetation, nature reveals such small oases. I lie down on the stones by the stream as not to disturb the soft moss, have a bite of food, and listen in amazement. A yearning and melancholy call captures my attention. And looking about, I spot who is meant for. A golden plover sits by the wayside, listening intently to its partner's call. Flanked by the Rhyolite Mountains and the furrowed mountainsides, the way continues across several patches of old snow, and I move on from the valley of Landmannalaugar. The trail now turns south and gradually leads to the spot where I already was yesterday, meeting up with the actual Laugavegur. I've reached the point where they cross. Having stopped so many times, I've been on the way for almost 6 hours and haven't met anybody so far. And although I've long expected this to happen, I'm surprised when suddenly they appear on the horizon. People. Happy, friendly, singing people. I remained standing in the snowfield for some time, and within half an hour more than 50 hikers walked by, all with their distinct idea of walking the Laugavegur. And although it was none of my business, I hoped that the Scotsman was wearing something under his kilt. The temperature drops severely with every elevation gain. The way leads gently and continuously upwards through numerous furrows and valleys, and after a while I reach Storikver, the large hot spring. This valley shows once again that the Laugavigur's course rests on active volcanic systems. From every direction the most diverse sounds are coming from the ground. There is seething and hissing everywhere. The trail continues along the red and yellow markers across extensive plateaus up to the height of 1000 meters. The temperature has dropped severely and there are some wide fields of old snow to cross. They are ankle deep from the warming rays of the sun and difficult to walk on. Having reached this plateau after some time, I realized that the first destination, the hut of Raptiniska, is only a few hundred meters away. The clear blue sky would hardly make one think that something bad could happen. And yet, almost to the day some years ago, a terrible accident happened. A young man set out in bad weather, despite all warnings by the warden of Lampmannalauga, and was killed during a horrible blizzard in this very spot, just a few hundred meters from the shelter of the hut. Deeply moved by the fate of this young man, I continue on slowly and recall even more urgently that I am in the middle of unpredictable nature. Lost in this thought, I quickly reached a hill, littered with black obsidian rocks, and really, only a few hundred meters from the memorial lies the hut of Raptinuska, the destination of the first leg. More and more hikers are come across the snowfield, making for the hut. I've been on the way for more than 11 hours today, and already this first leg was overwhelming. The sun will soon set, and before heading for the hut, I ascend to the nearby peak. The trail continues on the next goal, the Afterwatten. And as I cross the first snowfield, I wonder what awaits me today on this section of the way. I had set out right after noon, a wise decision, and I encounter only a handful of hikers, with nobody behind or in front of me. The first part of this section of the track once again leads up and down across an extensive plateau, sometimes more exhausting, sometimes less. Here on this stretch, numerous clefts hollowed out by the streams have to be crossed with great care. After about 6 kilometers, the plateau ends and following a short but steep incline, the entire landscape changes abruptly. The orange-colored Rhyolite Mountains are left behind, and rising up sharply, the green peaks of the Emstre mountain range come into view for the first time. However, before reaching the slope overlooking the entire plain, the trail leads down to a river valley. Meanwhile, a heavy layer of cloud has obscured the sun with an icy wind blowing. Disappointed by the poor lighting conditions, I continue and leave behind the hill with its magnificent view without filming anything. But after a short time, however, the wind breaks up some the cloud cover. I turn round, running back the entire distance to the plateau. I arrive exhausted, but in the nick of time. Within only a few minutes, the weather has changed once again, and I'm met by a sight I had previously known only from pictures. Halfway to the left, the Mýrdalsjökull, and in front of me, the breathtaking mountain range of Emströ, the Álftavatn at the center. Descending 400 meters down the slopes of the Jökultungur, the trail follows the Grashagakvísl, which later has to be forded. After only 2 steps in the river, I realized that filming this quite unspectacular crossing was a bad idea. The water is extremely cold, and I have to return to the camera and my rucksack. Everyone knows the feeling of thousands of needles piercing their feet incessantly. The trail goes on gently, leading to a broad valley, and after barely an hour, I reach the camp at Álftavatn. It is at 1:30 and everybody seems to be asleep. And yet, as expected, there seems to be a lot going on here. I have not reserved a sleeping place, so I glance over to the warden. And surely Jona, who is in charge of the hut for this year, is still awake and kindly heats up some homemade soup for me. This is exactly the food I need while sitting outside the hut, to review the material recorded today and to prepare for a comfortable sleeping place, the kitchen floor. Surprising how well you can sleep on a kitchen floor. And not until coffee powder trickles on my face and a slice of bread hits me do I slowly awake. The kitchen is cramped. More than 10 people are trying to prepare their breakfast at the same time, all taking themselves too seriously, with much discussing and a lot of noise. And I think to myself, what a scene it must be, with all of them already up and about while I'm still lying on the kitchen floor. I've never seen so many socks of different color. The weather is once again at its best, and I decide against the next leg to Botna, and instead choose to walk the 1 hour to the hut of Kvangil to spend an easy-going day there. After a little more than 1 hour, I reach the valley of Kvangil. A dozen horses are eager to get out. Several jeeps are parked in front of the hut, delivering provisions for the touring companies. And although I had planned to immediately settle down, there is too much going on for my taste. Thus, I decide to spend the day on an excursion. My tour will lead me along the northern face of the Myrtalsjökull into the sands of Mælifellssandur. And so I leave the Laugavegur's course for today, heading northeast. After some 3 hours, I've already walked far into the sandy desert. A bright blue sky visible in the distance, yet above me, the weather is about to become unpleasant. The clouds are piling up, and the strong wind is turning into a storm. In no time, I'm caught in the middle of a heavy sandstorm, with the lashing gusts of wind piling up meter-high dunes, and for several moments, I can hardly see my hand in front of my face. A rainbow has gently spanned the valley of Kvangil. I'm sitting in front of the hut to remove all the grains of sand that have made their way into every gap of my camera. A number of Icelandic children and teenagers have pitched up their tents and are very cheerful. The longer I watch them, the more I wish to walk the Laugavegur along with my children some years from now and imagine their eyes shining. It seems to be somebody's birthday, and so the warden has made a big fire, and soon everybody is standing at the open campfire site. The mood is very relaxed, and the epic surroundings, along with the crackling fire, makes for something special. After some time, I want to be alone, and so I walk up to the nearby summit to savor the beauty and quietness of Iceland.
Sometimes
Today the way continues on the Laugavegur, with Botna as the next milestone. The weather is perfect, a light wind, and the temperature feels like 25 degrees Celsius. After about 1 kilometer, I reached the Blaufjallaquissel, a stream no more than knee-deep, depending on the rainfall and the glacier melt. I need to cross in here, and it already becomes clear that I'll have to come up with a new tactic today, since the area is teeming with hikers. More and more are coming, some from Aufdervatn, others from Kvangil. And I realize how lucky I've been to have had nobody in front of or behind me until now. I stay by the waterside and count more than 80 hikers within 30 minutes. Thus my tactic will be to take a rest here by the stream and to catch some sleep while hiding behind a cliff. About 3 hours later, I awake. It's now 2 o'clock in the afternoon and there is nobody around. Only 5 hikers a good distance ahead of me, so I can now proceed. Having crossed the bridge spanning the glacier river Imri Emstruau, the trail follows the Highland Road F261 for some time, and shortly later a sign points the way to the next destination. I've reached the hill at the foot of Hattarfell, and my tactic has worked out. I'm alone. What a beautiful place for a long rest. The hut of Botna should soon come into view in a dell. The last chance to get some rest for today. Hattafettel, the head or cap mountain, juts out impressively from the dark plain. And once more do I stand at the turning point of the Laugavegur. To the rear, the trail of the previous days is visible, while to the front, the massive ice cap of the Eyjafjallajökull looms. From this knoll, you can also see the valley of Thorsmark in the distance, for the first time. By now, the sight is both familiar and expected. Scores of people, scores of tents. And yet better here at the designated areas than having to watch them pitch their tents somewhere en route and thereby harming what is precious and worth protecting: Mother Nature. Wild camping is prohibited on the entire course of the Laugavegur, and a good thing too. This rule should be observed implicitly, since the extremely sensitive nature in the highlands takes years to recuperate from the damage caused by pitching a tent or walking off the beaten track. Over the past days of this trek, I've seen so much of these unique landscapes, and it should be everybody's intent to protect it. And yet, I have met many who are oblivious to what surrounds them. Looking down, they simply move ahead in order to reach the next destination within the time stated by their guidebook. And perhaps it is they who leave marks such as these. The following morning proves benign. It is quiet, since most of the hikers have already left, and therefore miss out on the ceremonial hoisting of the Icelandic flag, accompanied by fervent singing. There is no question about it. Seeing these colors in this setting makes my heart beat faster. As a prelude to today's activities, I decide to go on a little walking tour to the vast Markaflötsglyphe Canyon, only a few kilometers west of the hut. The canyon's ridge drops some 200 meters, and it is once again overwhelming to be standing at this gorge. I return to the hut just in time to see the last group of hikers set out. And so Heidrun, who is in charge of the hut for this year, invites me in for some coffee. We are talking about Iceland's nature and Icelandic traditions, when suddenly she stands up to go down to the river, returning with a container. An Icelander happens to come by and says that I could now prove whether I'm a real man by tasting the pickled sheep's testicles and innards Heidrun has served up for me. Somehow I manage my way out of this and avoid having to try it. Instead, I have some more coffee and shortly later set out for Thorsmörk. The trail winds its way gently across rolling hills for about 2 kilometers, offering fantastic views of the glaciers. To the right, the distinctive silhouette of the towering unicorn repeatedly comes into view as I reach the sandy descent into a canyon. The glacier river Fremri Emstrau meanders through this gorge, surrounded by the finest vegetation. A bridge spans the river and I climb down the short but steep descent, secured by chains and ropes, and similarly back up on the other side. With the canyon on the right, the trail winds westwards through a sand and stone plain, and a little later I reach a brook. At the base of the Markaflotsklufur, which opens up again towards the west, the two glacier rivers Markaflot and Fremri Emstruau join. Somehow it has already been in the air this morning, and the sky seems to bode ill. The weather is deteriorating rapidly and rain sets in. Onward I go through several gorges, and very slowly the countryside begins to turn green. I'm clearly approaching my destination as the first heralds appear by the wayside. Small birch trees lining the trail. It is only a few kilometers to a valley where I have to overcome one of the largest obstacles of the Laugavegur. The narrow ford through the rapidly flowing Drangau. The increasing rain makes fording this more than knee-deep river even nastier, and I have great troubles keeping my balance because of the shouldered tripod. Luckily, there are hikers sitting at the other bank who could pull me out in case of an emergency. Having managed the ford, the rain stops falling and the trail leads on to a beautiful and enchanted birchwood. I have arrived in Thorsmørk. Within a short time I reach Laungidalur in the Thorsmørk Valley, and then Bausar in Godaland, the Laugavigur's final destination. Having descended into the valley, I come across this sign, and for a moment I'm tempted to turn round and walk the whole trail once again. Within a few hundred meters, the first hut comes into view, and some hikers I've met several times during the past days are sitting together comfortably. Their trek ends here, but I want to go on, and so I cordially decline the friendly invitation to their farewell dinner. I'm awake early to shrouds of clouds. However, the sky soon brightens, making it a perfect day to explore Thorsmørk. Like Landmannalaugar, the valley of Thorsmörk is amongst Iceland's most popular travel destinations, and thus highly frequented. The surrounding glacier shields from the strong winds, and so the valley enjoys a mild climate, allowing for a lush and varied vegetation. You should spend at least one day here to walk among the opulent birch trees and jagged gorges, from which numerous brooks and streams flow into the mighty glacier river Krossau. I've spent another night in the valley and will extend the tour across the Fimmvörðuháls Pass. More than 800 meters in altitude lie ahead of me today, and already the first kilometer rises steeply, offering a fantastic view of the rugged valley and the rich countryside of Godaland. After several passages secured by ropes, I reach what I consider the most difficult section of the entire trail, the Cat's Back. Here the mountain crest narrows to a thin ridge, and frankly, I have to crawl across some of the passages on all fours, because of the steep drop on either side and strong gusts of wind that make walking upright impossible. I am delighted to have overcome this cat's arched back, until I meet some hikers who, including a little dog, wander across the ridge without batting an eye, even upright. And I can hardly keep from laughing about my actions just minutes ago. I can only hope that they didn't spot my crawling across the ridge from afar. The trail continues up to Heiðarhorn's flank, more than 200 meters to the high plateau of the Morinsheiði. Weather permitting, the eye can enjoy a panorama of the landscapes, cover it on foot during the previous days. The view reaches as far as the mountain range of Raptiniska. Having reached the end of the Morensheidi Plateau, the crest once again becomes a narrow ridge, Hell's Ridge, which luckily is secured by a chain and thus quite easy to manage. Altogether, the Laugavegur demands little in terms of hiking qualities. You should definitely be in good shape, sure of step and free of vertigo, particularly if you want to extend the tour across the Fimbörduhals Pass. Crossing loose rubble, slippery ledges and several smaller snowfields, I arrive at plateau and the trail goes right between the two glaciers of Myrdalsjökull and Eyjafjallajökull. There seem to be only few who continue on by this way, as I've been by myself for many hours. The temperature has dropped significantly and icy wind is blowing from above. And dense fog is approaching in front of an endless snowfield. Trying to get a bearing in this mist is difficult, and although a hill looms ahead, for the first time on this tour do I experience a nightmarish feeling. By 1 o'clock at night I reach the hut. And normally I would get my first glimpse of the southern coast from here. But the fog has moved to the other side of the pass. To the west, a gorgeous view on the glacier slowly fades in the afterlight. The hut is plain yet very comfy, and there are 15 people here for the night. 10 of them were men, and out of their 10, 3 snored so heavily that I was ready to set out again even at night. For the next trip, earplugs will definitely be part of my standard equipment. Despite the dense fog, I set out for the final leg of my tour. The trail goes continuously downhill, and having crossed the last snowfield, I follow the tracks of a jeep. After some time, a lonesome hiker seems to appear from nowhere out of the mist. She tells me of her plan of walking all the way to Lampmannelaugar and is grateful for the advice I have to offer. Shortly later, I reach a wooden bridge across the Skoau River. The fog slowly clears, the first waterfalls come into view, and in the distance the coastline is visible for the first time. The most beautiful streams cascade into the valley, and as so often during the previous days, the wind drives away the clouds, and the sun can smoothly set the tone. The final kilometers lie ahead of me, and I follow the trail along the Skoau unhurriedly and with low steps, heading for the coast. As with almost every leg of this trek, I've walked this trail along the gorges and cascades of the Skoau more than once. Time passing by far too quickly in the past days and weeks. And yet I've tried to be fully aware of every moment and every experience. Soon afterwards, I'm sitting in an aeroplane on my way home, to my family, my children. And I'll tell them of what I have experienced and how important it is to spend time in natural surroundings, to study nature and learn to protect it. I already look forward to the day when we all walk the Laugavegur.